A long time ago, the Israelites were in great trouble. They lived in a beautiful land that God had given them. But their enemies, the Midianites, kept attacking them. The Midianites were fierce and cruel. They would invade the land like a swarm of locusts, destroying everything in their path. They took the Israelites' crops, animals, and food, leaving nothing behind. The Israelites became so scared that they started hiding in caves and mountains to protect themselves. They were hungry, afraid, and desperate. Finally, they cried out to God for help, and because God is faithful and hears his people when they call, he decided to save them. God chose Gideon to be the one to deliver Israel. But Gideon wasn't a warrior or a leader. In fact, when we first meet him, Gideon was hiding from the Midianites. He was threshing wheat in a winepress, a place where people normally press grapes, not wheat. He wanted to hide his work so the Midianites wouldn't find and steal it. While Gideon was working, an angel appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Judges 6:12, NY5. Gideon was shocked. He didn't feel like a mighty warrior at all. He asked, "If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about? How can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." Judges 6:13-15 NIV. The angel reassured him, saying, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Judges 6:14 NIV. Even then, Gideon wasn't sure he was the right person. He asked for a sign to prove that this message was really from God. He prepared an offering of bread and meat and placed it on a rock. The angel touched the offering with a staff, and fire came out of the rock and consumed it. Gideon was amazed and finally believed that God was calling him. God gave Gideon his first mission to destroy an altar to Baal, a false god that many Israelites had started worshipping. Gideon was scared because he knew the people would be angry, so he destroyed the altar at night. The next morning, when the people saw what had happened, they were furious. They demanded that Gideon be punished. But Gideon's father stood up for him and said, "If Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar." Judges 6:31 NIV. The people couldn't argue with that, and Gideon was safe. Even after these events, Gideon still felt nervous about leading an army against the Midianites. He wanted to be absolutely sure that God was with him. So he asked God for 2 more signs using a fleece of wool. First, he asked God to make the fleece wet with dew while keeping the ground dry. The next morning, the fleece was soaking wet, but the ground was dry. Then he asked for the opposite, for the fleece to stay dry while the ground became wet. Once again, God answered his prayer, showing his patience and kindness toward Gideon. Finally, confident in God's calling, Gideon gathered an army of 32,000 men to fight the Midianites. But God had a different plan. He told Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me, saying, 'My own strength has saved me.'" Judges 7:2 NIV. God told Gideon to send home anyone who was afraid, and 22,000 men left. Only 10,000 remained, but God said, "There are still too many." To reduce the number further, God told Gideon to take the men to a stream and watch how they drank water. Most of the men knelt down and drank directly from the stream, but 300 men scooped water into their hands and lapped it like dogs. God told Gideon to keep these 300 men and send the rest home. With just 300 soldiers, Gideon would face the massive Midianite army. Gideon divided his 300 men into 3 groups and gave each man a trumpet, a clay jar, and a torch. They didn't have swords or shields, but Gideon trusted God's plan. At night, they surrounded the Midianite camp. On Gideon's signal, the men blew their trumpets, smashed their jars, and held up their torches. They shouted, A sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Judges 7:20, NIV. The sudden noise, lights, and shouting caused chaos in the Midianite camp. The Midianites were so terrified that they began fighting each other. Those who survived fled, leaving the Israelites victorious without even lifting a sword. This incredible victory was a miracle. Gideon and his small army of 300 men defeated a vast and powerful enemy, not because of their strength, but because of God's power. The story shows us that God doesn't choose people based on their importance or abilities. He often uses those who feel weak or unimportant to do great things. As the Bible says in 2 Corinthians 12:9, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." NIV. When we trust in God and rely on His strength, He can work through us to accomplish what seems impossible. No matter how